Welcome to a weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today is Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Assistant Chief of Public Health Services, as well as Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Our guest this afternoon is Mr. Tim Whitehouse, who is Executive Director of the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and good afternoon to you, Mr. County Executive.
Good afternoon, everybody. You may notice that I'm wearing denim today, and that's because today is Denim Day in recognition of Sexual Violence Awareness Month. For the past 24 years, the organization Peace Over Violence has run its Denim Day campaign, and I'm joining this year. The campaign was originally triggered by a ruling by the Italian Supreme Court where a rape conviction was overturned because the justices felt that since the victim was wearing tight jeans, she must have helped her rapist remove her jeans, thereby implying consent. That's a fairly absurd rationale for a court to take. The following day, the women in the Italian parliament came to work wearing jeans in solidarity with the victim. Peace Over Violence developed the Denim Day campaign in response to this case and the activism surrounding it. Since then, wearing jeans on Denim Day has become a symbol of protest against erroneous, destructive attitudes about sexual assault. And I'm proud of the work that HHS, along with MCPD and our state's attorney's office do in terms of dealing with sexual violence and with sexual violence awareness in our county. And I'm also glad to see many county employees wearing denim in solidarity today. So my contribution is my denim jacket and my denim jeans on this occasion. On a sad note, I want to tell you that I was very saddened to learn this morning about the passing of Ruiz Bell, a longtime ride-on bus operator who died this morning after suffering a heart attack while on the job. Mr. Bell was behind the wheel of a southbound Route 55 bus when it happened, and even in that moment, he was thinking about the people around him. He brought the bus to a safe stop, preventing what could have been an even greater tragedy. That kind of calm under pressure tells you a lot about the person he was. Ruiz had been with the county since 2012. He was a proud member of McGeo, and he was a shop steward. He showed up every day for work, for his riders and for his coworkers. People knew him for his humor, kindness, and the way he made the workday a little lighter. Not because he had to, because that's who he was. He leaves behind his wife, 10 children, 6 girls and 4 boys, and he loved the Dallas Cowboys and grilling. He was 63 years old and he lived in Gaithersburg. On behalf of Montgomery County, I want to extend my condolences to his wife, children, coworkers, and MCDOT, and everyone who had the privilege of knowing him. I also want to thank the bus riders who tried to help him. His loss is a hard one, and he's going to be missed. A little bit earlier this morning, I attended the Scotland AME ribbon cutting, and this is the Scotland AME Zion Church. If you've been covering this for a while, and if you're at home think you know something about this or heard about it, you may remember that flooding caused by a poorly designed road project that did not adequately address stormwater from the realignment of Seven Locks Road nearly destroyed the old church in 2019. The day would not have been possible without several community partners who saw how important it was to replace the building for one of Montgomery County's oldest Black communities. The Glenstone Foundation was one of the first neighbors to step up and probably the leading contributor in helping Scotland as it got its revitalization effort going. And the J. Willard and Alice S. Merritt Jr. Foundation donated $1 million to the restoration, and the list of contributors goes on and on. The broad context of this is in the county's historic Black communities that emerged after the Civil War, where former enslaved people were able to purchase property. It was kind of a brief window when this happened in the county. But that right was ultimately eliminated as covenants were placed on almost all property in the county that barred selling or renting property to Black people. The consequences of that was that the population of these first Black communities were limited in how they could grow. The inability to continue buying land meant that the availability of land to hand down to successive generations grew smaller and smaller, to the point that it was too small to farm economically. If you think about, dividing a square into pieces, the more pieces you create, the smaller they get. At some point, the farms aren't going to be profitable. The bar on holding property meant that Black population shrunk from around 30% in 1870 to a little over 3% in 1960. We're looking at about 21% today. It wasn't until Montgomery County banned restrictive covenants and opened up rental and ownership opportunities in 1968 that the Black community had the opportunity to grow. The Scotland community is a fraction of its former size as families lost control of the land over time. This church has been a rock for those families who've stayed in Scotland, and we have an obligation to help restore it. This year's annual Juneteenth celebration is almost certain to include at least one event in the new building. And I'm glad that the county was able to play a role in restoring this building and protecting it from similar flash flooding in the future by placing it on higher ground than the older church and by having culverts that can actually carry the amount of water that flows there. We'll be sharing more on Juneteenth in the weeks to come. The church's history is what it represents for so many families, and it's immeasurable. You cannot quantify what this church means to people until you go there and listen to them talk about the history of Scotland and the role the church has played there. And it's glad to see that that the community again has access to the church, and they've been able to add some additional space. And it's a really nice thing. And it took a whole community coming together to make this possible. We are marking Donald Trump's 101st days, and the news reports and the polls are not good. Of course, those things are not enough to change what he's actually doing, but at least it's good to know that some people out there are awake and realizing what's happening here. During my State of the County speech President Donald Trump came up a few times, and it was inevitable, really, after the decisions of the first 100 days have prompted such a cataclysmic change in our local workforce and launched an assault on science. And an assault on science is pretty important in Montgomery County, since with NIH and FDA and NIST and all these other key kind of internationally known science institutions, having them attacked and dismantled is not a small thing. I didn't enjoy the first Trump administration. I spent 2 years as county executive under it. And this one seems to be even worse. The tariff rollout's been a disaster. The scaling back of the government has been haphazard, with some employees having to be rehired almost immediately after letting them go. Clearly, no thought or planning was put into a strategic downsizing, nor in making things more efficient. This really isn't about efficiency, nor is it about downsizing. It's about elimination. Elimination is neither inherently strategic or efficient, and that's, I think, what we're dealing with right now. There isn't a county or city in this nation that has not felt the impacts of this chaos, but we have and will continue to feel it worse than most. Montgomery County has experienced more job loss due to the firing of federal government workers in the first 100 days of this administration than it did in the last 2 years combined. And most of the job cuts were with HHS and NIH. Anywhere you go in the world, NIH is thought of as the crown jewel of health-related research institutions. I believe the real target in these cuts was the information gathered by scientific studies that delivers answers, which lead to regulations. Businesses don't want to be accountable or regulated as a result of scientific findings that would naturally trigger regulations, such as discovering that cigarette smoke causes cancer or asbestos destroys your lungs. Little things like that caused industries to have to change, and they're not really interested in finding out more. So if they can block the discovery of any information that points to a cause, they can prevent regulation, making them more profitable, but also responsible for more deaths. And there's no way to get around that. If we weren't able to regulate dangerous substances, and if we didn't know about dangerous substances because we blocked studying them, you would certainly have more deaths, and there's no way not to realize that's true. The public is starting to notice. Polls analyzing President Trump's first 100 days are now showing the lowest approval ratings at this point of any presidency in modern history. The only silver lining that can come from all this is that it prompts a reawakening of civic action. I've been an activist for decades, from the anti-war demonstrations and civil rights demonstrations at the University of Maryland to fighting for runners' rights in Tacoma Park. I know the actions speak louder than words. We have to use this anger and frustration over Trump and Elon Musk-led Doge efforts to spark a change, and we really do need to change. So you've heard me talk several times over the last 100 days, highlighting the Trump attack, not just on federal workers, but also the war on science and regulation. And that's why I have Tim Whitehouse from PEER, Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, on the media briefing this week. Since founding it, PEER has provided free legal defense for whistleblowers, empowered anonymous activists, and fought for higher environmental ethics and scientific integrity inside government agencies. Tim Whitehouse is executive director of PEER, and I wanted to welcome him to this media briefing to talk about what he's seeing from the federal government, from his vantage point. So, Tim, it's all yours now.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. PEER is located in Silver Spring. We're a national organization. I want to echo what the county executive has said about the actions of the Trump administration, and just emphasize that what we're seeing in the inside is much worse than what you're reading in the newspapers. And unfortunately, the damage is being done, and we have very little time to stop it. One of the things I wanted to offer to the media on this call is, because we work with a lot of people in Montgomery County that have been affected by the Trump actions, that there are people that want to speak on the record, tell their stories about what's happening, tell people about their careers and how their careers were cut short. Many of the people being affected are, not all, but many are in the early stages of their career. And so the actions of the Trump administration are designed to inflict trauma on the federal workforce and destroy the federal workforce, both to make sure there's not a regulatory function, but also to privatize existing functions that may be profitable for the private sector. One example we're seeing that directly affects Montgomery County is NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, which is located in Silver Spring. Their probationary employees have been fired, rehired, fired again, and given a retroactive firing date, which means they were fired before they're actually fired. And as a consequence, many of them have been paying for health insurance, but don't have health insurance. Many of them live in Montgomery County. They've undergone surgeries. They've incurred significant costs. And the Department of Commerce, which runs NOAA, is refusing to provide them with that health insurance. And at the same time, the Trump administration is trying to kill the administrative processes that would allow these employees to get their health insurance back. So it's a really cruel, it's a very dire situation, and PEER is here as a resource for any media that wants to connect with some of the people affected and get some real on-the-ground stories. I will say the entire county and the state delegation have been very supportive of federal employees, and unfortunately, the Trump administration just doesn't seem to care and is fighting everything they can in the courts. So thank you.
That's pretty astounding. How do you fire somebody before they were fired?
Well, you give them a retroactive firing. So you say you're on April 9th, you send them a letter saying, and they don't even address it to a person. And they say you are fired effective in February, even though you've been deducting health insurance. And so people are incurring health costs. And when they go to get their doctor's appointment, their surgery, they're being told they don't have insurance, even though it's deducted from their paycheck. So the way to go to get that remedied, which would take several years, is the Merit System Protections Board. But Trump has fired there's no quorum there. So they're destroying all means for these federal employees to seek redress. The federal courts are trying to step in, but it's going to be a long haul. This will end up in the Supreme Court, and it'll take years to resolve. Meanwhile, people in Montgomery County and elsewhere are really feeling the effects of these actions designed to inflict trauma.
So you've been around a while, going back to the last administration. If I remember correctly, when Trump tried to cut NIH, the Republicans in Congress actually stood up and restored the funding. What the hell is going on?
Yeah, I remember, and when I started my environmental career in the 1990s, there was Democratic and Republican oversight of any administration. And that seems to have been completely lost, eroded over the last 20 or 30 years. And there seems to be a political calculus that people have to stay with Trump. And the only thing that's going to change this is the mid-years. But even then, all bets are off in terms of how they want to comply with the law.
It's pretty shocking. I would take it that most people are just kind of stunned beyond belief and not being able to imagine this would possibly happen here.
Yeah, so much is happening at once. The strategy of flooding the zone actually worked. So I think in any one moment, any of the issues we are working on would be front page stories in the Washington Post or New York Times, but there's so many more important front page stories that these really significant efforts to harm public employees and override the law and constitutions are being, there's just no space for them in the public discourse. And so it's a real successful strategy they've implemented, but in the short term, it's extremely destructive, and hopefully we'll recover.
Hopefully we will. Lauren, you want to turn it over to see if there are any questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that, Mr. County Executive. Members of the media, do you have any questions for Mr. Whitehouse? Please raise your hands. No questions related to this topic? Well, Mr. Whitehouse, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You can remain on this event, but if you need to depart, please feel free to do so.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. I will depart, and please contact me if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. So next, I want to talk about the council's decision to override my veto bill of Bill 225. I want to thank council members Joando and Mink for voting to sustain the veto in order to have more time to develop a better bill. I vetoed this bill because it's a bad idea for residents of Montgomery County. It hands out taxpayer money to developers for no rational reason and with virtually no additional affordability, a tiny bump in MPDUs and zero requirements for workforce housing, which is particularly odd since the sponsors have been obsessing over how they're going to rezone all these other places in the county for workforce housing, tearing into existing neighborhoods. But oddly enough, they're not going to require builders of these new developments to provide any additional workforce housing. It is a bit strange. It seems to be that the sacrifices are expected to be visited on neighborhoods, but developers really shouldn't expect too much sacrifice. What's worse about this is giving this away, that it's going to projects that were already financially viable. We showed the council that multiple conversions have been done going back about 7 years and are in the planning department right now for approval. There's a building being finished on Cameron and Georgia Avenue that requested no subsidy. None of these buildings requested subsidies in order to do the conversion, and Park and Planning did a report where they said that the market had already determined that it was feasible for an owner of office property to convert it to residential property. So with no evidence that this is necessary and plenty of examples that it isn't necessary, this bill winds up being passed by the council this time on a 9-2 vote. All this bill really does is protect an existing owner from having to sell his property at market value to someone who will make the conversion work. And this is truly how it comes down. In the real world, if you don't have enough rent to support your building, you lose your building. And then the bank takes it over. You either give it back to the bank, or your other choice is to sell it and give the bank the proceeds of what you got, but you wind up with nothing. This is literally a developer relief bill that allows them to hold on to their buildings, gets them out of taxes for 20 years. That must be nice. so they can build another profitable building and go on making money. Meanwhile, money that normally would come into our coffers to pay for the little things that we ask everybody to pay for here, like schools, transportation, public health, libraries, parks, that money's not going to come from these projects. And this is, it is not a very sensible way to go about doing your tax policy. They included two malls in this, the Westfield properties in Wheaton and over at Montgomery Mall. They would be able to take advantage of this conversion. This is one of the wealthiest companies in the world, and they would be allowed to not pay taxes on the properties that they convert, since it's more than a one-story high building. So it's kind of unfathomable that you would give away this much money and get nothing back for it. And I felt, sympathy for the people who did support the veto, because the response to the council was basically to have people say you're lying. It's a fine thing to say, I guess, as long as you can actually say you're lying and this is why you're lying, which they're not able to do. Lying is calling people liars is a really poor defense of your position. You're probably better off trying to defend it by saying what they said isn't true and being able to demonstrate it's not true. But they can't do that. They can't demonstrate they did any studies because they never did any studies. So this is challenging, and it's going to cost taxpayers money. Nobody should be confused. The less money we get from development, that's less money in our county coffers to fund the budget. That's fewer things that will be done. And that's just not the way we're supposed to be doing things. And particularly, the council's in the midst of dealing with our budget, and they're talking about not wanting to fund tax increases to provide the services we currently provide. And then they're going to reduce the revenue to provide those services by giving away these tax giveaways. There's a lack of consistency in this, and I'm sorry that they're doing this, and I hope that at some point we get to reverse this, because this is not good public policy. They also said this is just like the policy in DC, but it's not. In DC, there's discretion for which projects get the tax abatement, and it's limited to certain areas of the city. This is unlimited, and there is no discretion. If somebody does this and they want a tax abatement, they get the tax abatement. And like I said, it's 100% elimination of property taxes over 20 years. And if you want to look at other jurisdictions, let's look at Northern Virginia, where elected officials supported by the business community asked then Governor Bob McDonnell, who was a Republican, to let them impose local taxing authority to fund infrastructure. They asked for that because they understood the importance of transportation infrastructure and that it was essential to bring in economic development. Infrastructure is the one thing that separates Montgomery County from Northern Virginia over the past decade or so. They build it and we don't. And they tax developers and we don't. And the consequences of not taxing developers is not having the money to do the things we need to do, while Virginia goes merrily ahead building infrastructure and providing the underpinnings of a better economy. We have a lot to learn from them. We need to be willing to look outside our doors to see what's happening. And since people complain a lot about Tyson's and like to compare us to Tyson's, they should look at the tax rates in Tyson's, because they're a lot higher than they are in Montgomery County, and it's worked for them. So Montgomery County, is not learning from its neighbors, and we need to build the infrastructure now. We cannot afford to continue to delay. Northern Virginia just announced its BRT plan. It's extensive, and of course, they will have the money to pay for it. We are still struggling to pay for what we passed as a BRT plan over 12 years ago. We've not been able to build a single inch of real BRT because we don't have the revenues to do it. Meanwhile, Virginia's done all this other major development for transportation, and now they're getting ready to build massive BRT at scale. I don't know what it's going to take to wake people up to what's happening here, but people need to wake up. I'm disappointed in this action, and I've certainly heard from many residents who feel similarly. While the council may have the votes to override the veto, it doesn't make it right. My job is to look out for the long-term health of this county, and I'm going to keep doing that. This is, at a time when we don't know what's going to happen this year, with the budget. We don't know what the federal government's going to do. Anything that reduces our revenues is not a good thing to be doing. Last week, I wrote the council and withdrew my proposal for a 3.5-cent property tax increase. Instead, I recommended that we raise the income tax rate from 3.2 to 3.3%. I told people when I put in the property tax increase that we were doing it because it is the only way the county can raise revenue. And this is true across the state. Any county that's at 3.2, and a lot of counties are at 3.2, have no ability to raise their income taxes. And the limitations in our county where this is without being able to raise income taxes, which is more progressive, we had to look at the property tax. I told people I'd likely change things if there were changes in the state legislature. One of the big things that changed was allowing the county to increase, all the counties to increase their tax cap to 3.3 from 3.2%. So we coupled the proposal to raise it to 3.3 with an increase in the working families income supplement, which will help decrease the impact on working families. And it depends how much income you make and how many children you have, but it does supplement the current credit. And we also gave a $60 increase in the property tax credit for all property owners, all residential property owners, which will offset some of the cost of the income tax. The supplement helps our poorest workers and their families, and tax credit helps property owners, especially those on fixed income. I do believe the property owners have a point when they say that the rising property values has no connection to rising income. And so just because your property got reassessed and went up doesn't mean your income went up, which makes the income taxes a lot fairer way because the taxes are based on your income, not on your property values. So I tried to make this as progressive as we could, and I'm happy we're able to get some progressivity. And I hope the council members look at this and take it seriously. If there is no tax increase, it's going to be very hard to provide the same services or adjust the problems that we were brought to face. Obviously, the school budget increase was huge, bigger than anything we've ever had to deal with before. And it made putting this budget together more challenging. But their needs are very particular, particularly increases in special education. And those are things that the school system should have brought forward years ago, literally years ago. We wouldn't have been in this hole as we are today, but they didn't do it. And now we have to deal with it. So we're dealing with it. But it also means that, without some relief, we don't have the ability to fund other crucial services in the county. That would certainly lead to cuts to services that our residents see. There's no way around that. Or it would lead to cuts in reserves. And while the target for the county has been 10%, my administration's consistently been able to achieve greater than 10% in reserves. And this year, we could have eliminated the reserves and brought them down to 10% and not needed a tax increase. But given what's happening with the federal government, given the loss of jobs that will likely play out over the next budget year in our income tax revenues, we felt it was prudent to make sure that we had enough money in reserves to help buffer some of what we know are going to be winds that are blowing in a different direction. So that's as much as I try to make this clear where this comes from, because we really do have a level of uncertainty. Well, I think what we're certain about is we're going to get hit by some things economically. What we're not certain about is how much. And so a better buffer is a better way to approach this. So I think this plan strikes the right balance to keep the county budget secure and our services intact for the tough road ahead, while helping us best ensure we maintain our AAA bond rating. And it's important for Montgomery County to be able to have a sound financial basis, and it helps us prepare for the future. On a happier note, on Monday, we held our 50th Public Safety Awards. breakfast, and this is not something we often do in person anymore. This is the first time since the pandemic that it's been a live event. And it was good to revisit the idea of bringing all our public safety teams together to honor some of the best examples of heroism and selflessness in our county over the last year. I want to thank our partner, the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce. They helped us honor outstanding work within the Sheriff's Office, Montgomery County Police Department, Montgomery County Fire and Rescue, Park Police, and the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Recognitions were also earned by members of the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security and the Department of Health and Human Services. It was an honor to have Wes Moore join us and to speak, and also Comptroller Brooke Learman, Congresswoman McLean Delaney, and Congressman Raskin all stopped by to be recognized and to help us recognize Monday's winners. Thorough and well-done videos honoring some of the recipients taught us much about what it takes to keep our community safe. We know all these jobs are a calling and that much is asked of these public servants. Honoring them is when they go above and beyond what they're asked to do or what the normal course of action would be to keep our community safe is the right thing to do. These folks consistently show the willingness to put themselves at risk in order to keep all of us safe. And probably an example of this is at the same time breakfast was going on, we had an example of a quick actions by police officers that helped avert a disaster. I think this was actually the day before. It happened when a driver ignored a closed road sign at Frederick and Redland Road. The truck continued down the closed roadway, forcing an officer to jump out of the way. The truck turned again and then was headed right for a group of runners getting ready for a race. Another officer in a police car blocked the moving truck and was able to stop it before he reached the runner. Fortunately, no one was injured, but it could have easily turned out differently. These are the kind of split-second decisions that we are expecting our public safety teams to be able to make on a routine basis. And this is a great example of how that split-second decision to block the car and take a hit on this car meant that there weren't serious injuries and possibly deaths. At a moment's notice, these folks have to make these kind of decisions, and it's something we all appreciate them for. And I'm proud of the work being done in this county to keep our public safe. It's truly the kind of work all of us need, whether we know it or not. Before I turn to our HHS team for their report, I want to acknowledge the passing of Ida Pearl Green, a beloved community matriarch and one of our African-American living legends, honored with that title in 2022. Ms. Green lived an extraordinary 106 years, during which she dedicated herself to family, her faith, and the betterment of our county. Ms. Green was also the grandmother of our health officer, Dr. Keisha Davis. And we want to send Dr. Davis and her entire families our condolences for their loss. Despite facing hardships early in life, Ms. Green remained steadfast in her faith and hope. She was a constant presence in her neighborhood, caring for children, working as an Avon representative, volunteering, and lifting up those around her through acts of kindness and compassion. We're grateful for her unwavering commitment to others, and we honor the indelible impacts she's made on our county. I'd like to give Dr. Stoddard and our HHS team now an opportunity to provide any updates they want, and then we'll start our questions. So it's off to you, Dr. Stoddard.
I have no updates this morning. In addition, I do want to echo what you said though about the Public Safety Awards. It was an honor and a privilege to be able to be part of the planning team for the event. For my part in it, I thought it was just great that the first responders were recognized for their heroic and valiant efforts. And frankly, I got a lot of thank yous from them. So it was clear that the recognition did mean a lot to them and candidly will help us in, future recruitment, because people get to see that we appreciate our first responders here in Montgomery County, and that'll make it better for us to respond to recruit in Montgomery County from those people who see these acts of heroism and say, I want to be part of that too. So appreciate the recognition. I'll go on to Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard. Just a couple quick announcements. One, in recognition, April 26th was National Drug Take Back Day. And this is important to check through your medicine cabinets or other places you keep medicine, take a look that you don't have expired medications. If you have family members, particularly who are seniors who have medication, please check that. The writing on those pill bottles is very, very small. It can be easy to accidentally take the wrong medication. Expired medications are less efficacious. So just for safety, we recommend going through and purging old medications. The county does have at each of its 6 district police stations does have kiosks where you can drop off medications securely. Some medications can be safely flushed, but we just want to remind people of that. It's a good time once a year to at least check to get rid of medications that are old or expired. I also want to mention this time of year, I know we've had, it's the wet season, mosquitoes are starting to come out, but also ticks. This is May, June, July. Those are the most frequent months in which we see tick bites. In the Mid-Atlantic area, certainly throughout Montgomery County, we have lots of wooded areas, lots of other areas that ticks can thrive. They spread more than a dozen different diseases. I think the most well-known one is Lyme disease. Lyme disease can be treated, and most people will recover quickly and completely if they start antibiotics early. If it's left untreated, people can have lifelong neurological or arthritic conditions. And what you're looking for first of all, if you're in a wooded area, just check to make sure after you come out that you don't have any ticks on you. DEET, mosquito spray, bug spray, long clothes, those all help to prevent it. And if you have been bitten, the telltale signs of Lyme disease are often a circular rash or a bullseye rash. It's not usually itchy, but if you do see something like that, please consult with your primary care provider, and they'll likely recommend the appropriate treatment. Finally, I just want to recognize that I know there's lots of changes to some of our national websites. We know that the covid.org webpage has come down and is now redirecting to the White House webpage. It no longer includes useful COVID information. The CDC website still has very useful COVID information. We just want to confirm that both our partners at the Maryland Department of Health and locally, we will continue to provide important information both on surveillance, on appropriate vaccine recommendations, and even search engines for where to get tested if you need to be. So we just want to let people know that information will still come out from your local and state partners. That's all the information I have for you today, and I'm happy to turn it back over to the county executive or for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Donnell and Dr. Stoddard. Members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for general questions. So please raise your hands. Jeannie Bixby with us up today. Good afternoon, Jeannie.
Good afternoon, Lorna. Good afternoon, Mark.
Hey,
I wanted to ask you, I know that the president, Donald Trump, has put out essentially a warning, a threat that he is going to create a list of jurisdictions that have sanctuary policies. I know that you have continually said Montgomery County is not a sanctuary county, but it seemed from what I've read that some of the policies the county has could fall under the president's list. Are you concerned? Have you received any communication?
I've got this executive order, and I got to be honest with you. I have a hard time finding things. For example, in no way, shape, or form does public safety ever interfere with the operation of ICE. We don't block people. We don't, block people from getting taken. We don't interfere with ICE activities. We never have interfered with ICE activities. We have a policy that we had a, I would say, positive relationship with ICE. We do allow some people, some detainers to be honored for people who committed serious crimes when they're released from the jail. Once they're in the court system, it's not a county problem. It becomes the courts that control what happens to people in the jail. I can't declare people freed from jail until a judge orders them freed from jail. At the point of a handoff from jail, though, if people have detainers and evidence that they committed serious crimes, either the crime they were arrested for immediately or something in their past that was like a gun offense or rape, they could have been arrested on something lesser here. But if they've got a past history, these are people that we've been willing to honor the detainers for. We weren't honoring detainers for other people, and they would always tell us, we're interested in the bad folks, we're not interested in everybody. So we thought we were in a pretty good place with that. We don't shelter people from the government. This is a little hard to understand. It appears that they could include, if somebody goes into a homeless shelter in Montgomery County, that if for harboring, they would consider that harboring. So if you take a person who's homeless and they happen to be an immigrant who's not here legally, you could be charged with harboring an illegal immigrant. It is hard to believe in what world you exist. And, God knows if you believe in any of the major religions, where you would not harbor the homeless and feed the hungry. I mean, if you had any ethics or morals, that would be considered normal things that you do. Also, unlike places like Nazi Germany and Russia, we don't ask for anybody's papers. You don't ask somebody, prove you're an American. That'd be like asking somebody, prove you live in Maryland and not in Texas, just as a matter of messing with people. There are a lot of things in their list that are things we don't do. And the stuff that we do, like provide homeless shelters, it's hard to see that as being, a major crime against humanity. So I just don't see it. And they do have a couple, I will say, perverse things. Equal treatment of Americans. So if you do any program that tries to redress previous injustices, like the fact that Black people are historically didn't get educations they should have gotten, or that Black businesses didn't have opportunities because everything was controlled by white people, which is pretty much true. Montgomery County, this place was segregated, and the housing was segregated well past the 1960s. If you do anything to try to redress that you're discriminating against white people, and that's illegal. This is nuts to take it this far. And I can't believe that any decent human being would not feel some obligation to try to undo the unjust situations that have been created, which in some cases you could argue leads to behavior which is less than optimal for people. If people are hungry and don't have access to jobs, you can pretty much guarantee they're going to find some way of feeding themselves. If you do not try to build a healthier society and an inclusive society, you're going to get results that are even worse. And so it just appalls me that people could have that little moral compass. And it's frightening. It's bad enough that, it's Trump and it's, the Doge people and Elon Musk. But when the entire Congress, Republican side of Congress, doesn't see any of this as an affront to their value systems, it amazes me. And I don't know what changed. 4 years ago, when Trump tried to cut NIH, the Republicans in Congress restored the funding to NIH. Now he's decimating NIH, and these guys aren't saying a word. Something's seriously wrong. Either they're very afraid of something that we don't know about. In fact, they probably are very afraid of something we don't know about. I can't believe they all changed their minds and decided there's no such thing as justice, and homeless people should be left to starve. I don't get it.
Thank you. Just to follow up, if I have a second, have you received any communication on this from the federal government?
I don't know I can't tell you how I got this memo, but it's a 3-page memo from Donald J. Trump in the White House, April 28th, 2025.
Yeah, that's executive order that was posted on the website. Jane, to answer your question, I actually went to our correspondence person in the office today. We've received no communications directly from the White House or anyone else on immigration since we got the infamous pre-inauguration letter from the Stephen Miller law firm, which I think you did reporting on as well. So we haven't
Okay.
received anything since then. Obviously, I think the executive order gives the Attorney General and Department of Homeland Security 30 days to produce their designation of what they're going to define sanctuary jurisdictions as. And then obviously thereafter, there will be executive branch agency against the executive branch action against the funding sources for those jurisdictions. And without knowing whether Montgomery County is going to be on the list, I will simply predict that there will be lawyers and there will be, substantial pushback in the court system on both delineation of who sanctuary jurisdictions are and how those are defined, but also the funding, pursuing funding for them. So I think we've got a little ways to go before we really understand A, how they'll define Montgomery County, and B, what that'll mean should they define us. So more to come.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Members of the media, any other questions for the county executive and county officials this afternoon? No more questions? Once, going twice? Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Stay safe, have a great afternoon, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.